Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Job Hunter podcast with your host Tim French. This week is another slightly international edition as we are heading to Switzerland by way of Bonnie, Scotland to talk all things physicsy. If I were to ask you what the answer was to the meaning of life, the universe and everything, you would of course say the number 42, or so supposed by Douglas Adams in his excellent novel The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. However, there are a select bunch of people looking a little closer to home to find out more about how our universe was born and what it means for us. So you all know what to do by now. Sit back, relax, and prepare yourself as we head into the subatomic collision that is this week's episode. Hello and welcome back to the Job Hunter podcast. This week, I'm delighted to welcome Adam Rennie to the Job Hunter podcast. Adam is part of a team trying to understand what happened at the formation of our universe. Adam, why don't you kick us off by telling our listeners a bit more about what exactly you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently out in Geneva and I kind of work at this lab called CERN. And yeah, as you said, Tim, it's kind of looking to understand what goes on in the most kind of extreme conditions imaginable in the universe. And so there are kind of, there's a massive machine out here that is our experiment. It's the largest experiment that has ever been constructed. So it's this 27 kilometer ring, and we send these subatomic particles around it, into 99.99999% of the speed of light, and we collide them, and you get these huge energies. And we want to basically just see what happens and try and understand what's going on there. So we bring them into collision at 4 different points around that ring. There are 4 different kind of detectors there. I work on one of them, which is called the Atlas experiment. And I mean, these things, although we're looking at these tiny subatomic particles, these are massive machines. Like I say, the ring is 27 kilometers around. The experiment, my detector it weighs about 7,000 tons, and it's about half the size of Notre Dame Cathedral. So it's this gargantuan kind of effort. And there are thousands of people, thousands and thousands of scientists working on this. So it really is this huge kind of endeavor. And I get to be just kind of a small part of that, trying to understand one small piece of the kind of big picture.
So how exactly do you detect these particles? I imagine they're, atomic scale, subatomic scales. They're probably quite hard to get them to line up in that essence. How do you control them so that you ensure they do hit each other and get detected?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really interesting question actually, because it's a really difficult thing to do. Like you say, these are tiny, infinitesimally small particles, and you're accelerating them to these huge energies. And so what you have is you have sort of basically 2 fields to control them. So you use an electric field to accelerate the particles up to these really high speeds and high energies to collide them. And as they're going around the ring, you use these really powerful magnets to bend them around. And I mean, even just the magnets, the whole thing is this huge technological challenge. The magnets have to be cooled to colder than outer space. The magnets at the LHC are colder than it is in outer space. So there are technological challenges around every corner. And really, these detectors act almost as like a big digital camera. It just wants to kind of take a snapshot of these collisions. And you get all of these kind of signals. These detectors are kind of in different layers that do different things to try and identify different characteristics of the particles that are coming out of there. And you want to try and basically use all the information that you're gathering in these detectors and the various layers of them to try and form your best picture of what happened. And I mean, we actually can, we generate sort of digital images. So you can actually see that as a digital image and see kind of the particles flying out in these detectors. But it's a huge technical challenge. I'm sort of spend most of my time analyzing the data that comes out of these detectors. But by the time it's at me, there's been thousands and thousands of people that have contributed to the whole process up to the point where I sit on my computer and make some graphs of what's going on.
So what specifically are you trying to learn? What are you trying to get out of these experiments?
So broadly speaking, Atlas, which is the experiment that I work on, is one of two what we call general purpose experiments. And so it's looking at all different aspects of these collisions. And really, you're trying to understand the very most fundamental science that there is in the universe. And so what particle physics is this study of these fundamental particles that make up everything in the universe and the forces that sort of govern how they all interact. And, in some sense, that is what leads to everything, that exists in the universe. So it really is the most kind of fundamental understanding. And we try the higher energy that you go at these colliders, you see these more and more kind of extreme events. And it's sort of analogous to going further and further back in the history of the universe to where you've had these really high energy densities. And that's why we often talk about, looking at or trying to look at the conditions that would have existed around the Big Bang, is because you had these really high energies. Einstein's equation that everyone knows, the E equals mc squared, basically tells you that you can swap mass and energy. And so basically what we achieve in going into higher and higher energies is that we almost have a higher budget for creating heavier particles. And it tends to be the heavier particles that we don't really understand so well just now. And these are these fundamental particles. So fundamental in the sense that they can't be broken down into anything else as far as we can tell. And so, your energy at these colliders is almost like the budget that you have for creating particles. So the higher energy you have, then the kind of heavier particles you can make and more of them as well. And these are the ones that we don't really understand very well. So we're trying to understand them and how they sort of relate to the forces that exist in the universe.
So like you said, this seems to be fundamental work, very important work. But why do you think CERN is so important that we need to do these experiments?
I mean, I think it's important in its own right. I mean, doing this kind of fundamental science, I think, is important. I mean, I think it's part of what we've always kind of done as a civilization. It really is curiosity driven kind of science. It's trying to understand the most fundamental features of the universe. But that's not to say that it's the only thing that comes out of a place like CERN. Like I say, when you have these collaborations, these experiments that are thousands and thousands of people and all working, it really is this kind of interplay between so many different fields. Maybe I'm doing some of the sort of experimental physics and looking at this data, but like I say, someone has to build. You have to have engineers that build these tunnels to put the machine in. You have to have engineers that are going to build the machine itself. There's armies of technicians that are, keeping the whole thing running the whole time. You have to work out how to handle all of the data. I mean, that in itself is a huge challenge. All of these sort of challenges to get to the point where you're able to start looking into the physics. You're solving so many problems along the way that, I mean, you have natural spin-offs. I mean, it's actually one of the really cool things about my office at CERN. So although I'm not there quite so much at the moment, so I'm at the University of Glasgow, and the Glasgow office at CERN is in the same corridor where Tim Berners-Lee was when he kind of came up with the World Wide Web, which was another thing that came out of CERN. So, quite often on my way to the office, I have to walk past people at the plaque in the corridor, taking pictures and whatnot. But it's just kind of one example of the things that kind of come out of this. And I mean, even now, as we're working on the Large Hadron Collider at the moment, is the collider of the day, and that's where our detectors are. But we're always thinking for the future, and there are always proposals for future experiments and things. And just yesterday, I was speaking to one of my friends who's kind of worked on developing some of the new technology for one of these proposed experiments. And I mean, the other side of the coin for that technology that he's working on is it's being used in hospitals to develop these new hadron therapy machines to treat people with cancer, and so I think to me, the reason for it is it's fundamental science. It's who we are, and it's interesting to do in its own right. But there's just a plethora of other things that kind of come out of doing science and doing, these projects on this scale.
So you're hoping Adam Rennie gets put up on a plaque next to Tim Berners-Lee?
Well, we need to see about that. I don't know, a few more podcasts before we get to that point, I think.
Definitely. What made you want to get into physics?
Yeah, so I think I thought about this a few times because sometimes I find myself, on the balcony here and thinking, how did I end up? Why am I in Geneva? And I think I was always interested in science, but maybe didn't always know it. Like when I think about kind of growing up and things, I would mess around with my dad, and we used to make little like smoke bombs and take them to the beach and think, just like kind of little silly experiments like that I used to do with my dad. I never really thought much of it at the time. It was just like a fun thing to do. But I guess in hindsight, I was kind of always interested. But it wasn't sort of the case that I always thought, I'll go and be a physicist. That's my life's goal. I think I was just kind of followed what I found interesting at the time. And so, when I was in school, well, I thought I wanted to be an author for a while. And then I think I sort of realized that I was interested in science. And then I thought I wanted to do some sort of biochemistry. And then at some point in school, I think I was just watching kind of TV documentaries and reading popular science and things like that. And, you start watching Brian Cox programs and that sort of thing. And I just became interested. And so I thought, well, I'll do a physics degree. So I went to also Glasgow, did my degree in Glasgow. And through, again, it was just another case of kind of following what I was interested in. At some point, sort of later in my degree, I became more interested in the kind of particle physics side of things. But even then, I was more interested in the detectors and building the detectors and designing them. And then I kind of fell into this and whatnot. So, I think it's something that I think I've spoken to a few people here about, is that it's, I think as nice as it is sometimes to hear those stories about, people that always knew they wanted to be, this or that, and they followed their dream and it happened, and that's great. Like, I think for a lot of people, you just kind of, you end up where you are, and it's kind of this meandering path. And I just followed what I was interested in, I think.
You mentioned Brian Cox there. Would you say he's one of your science heroes, or do you have any people that you look up to within your profession?
Yeah, in terms of kind of public figures, then, he was around the time that I was kind of growing up and was at school and things. He was prominent and so definitely influential in that sense. And then there are countless people around me that I kind of look up to just now that maybe aren't quite so public. But it's interesting with the likes of Brian Cox or some other people that wrote maybe popular science books and things like that. Because I never, like I say, it wasn't that I always thought I wanted to go and be a particle physicist and whatnot. But now that I've kind of ended up here, it so happens that it was kind of the path that some of those people followed as well. Brian Cox is still an author on the Atlas experiment, the same experiment I'm on. I'm out here for about 2 years, and one of the other people that's out here at the moment is his PhD student. And you kind of come across some of these people as well, just not so much at conferences and things these days, but usually. So it's kind of funny how things end up like that as well.
So it's a pretty small world in the world of particle physics.
Yeah, well, I think it ends up being smaller than you would imagine, because there are thousands and thousands of people working on it, but somehow you end up crossing paths with a lot of people.
And how do you think the work you're doing is going to shape the future? How do you think the stuff you're doing is going to impact the world?
Yeah, so I think that's a
very deep and philosophical question. I'm sorry to say, but I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, no, it's. I think it's an important thing to think about, though, because you want to feel like what you're doing is you're leaving an impact and whatnot. But I think it's an especially kind of hard thing to answer when you are doing fundamental science, because that if it's going to be some sort of technological fallout or something like that, something that makes its way into the mainstream, in fundamental science, there tends to be a really long lag, between the fundamental kind of understanding and then people kind of figuring out what to do with that. So I have no idea in terms of mainstream impact or whatnot. The hope, as far as in my field goes, is that, you improve. I mean, really the kind of analysis that I'm doing is more to sort of enable future kind of searches for new particles and things like that, or to understand some of these more extreme events. And what the analysis I'm doing is to basically allow us to do that more precisely. So it's to kind of get a better understanding of some of the things that we can see just now, so that, because one of the major challenges, like I say, you take maybe this kind of picture of one of these collisions, and there's a lot that's going on, and you need to be able to pick out what the thing you're interested in is from all the other stuff that's going on. I mean, when I talked about like the data challenges, like at the LHC, these protons that we collide, they go around, and they go around in bunches, and we cross the bunches to collide the protons. And there are bunch crossings at a rate of, I think it's like 40 million bunch crossings per second. And in each of those crossings, you might have 40 collisions or something like that. And so, you need to look at the mess that is what's going on in a detector and somehow, make some sense of it. So that's, I guess in short, I'm hoping that what I'm doing can help, subsequent researchers kind of better understand what's going on.
So you're trying to find a needle in a stack of needles?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. It's a really busy environment at the Large Hadron Collider.
And you've said that you wanted to take kind of a more meandering path to life and let it take you anywhere it wants to go. But do you have any specific career goals or anything you'll look back and think, yeah, I've done a good job here. I've definitely made it.
I don't know if I quite think about it like that, because I think, I don't know. I don't want to put pressure on myself to kind of do one thing and then be disappointed if it doesn't quite work out like that, I think. But I mean, I think I kind of just want to follow what I'm interested in, and just now I'm really enjoying doing this, and I hope to kind of continue with that. It's not really an easy field to be in a kind of job market kind of sense. There 20 people like me for every job at the next level that there is, and whatnot. So, as much I would like to continue, and if I can do that, then I think at the moment that's what I'd like to do. If I end up, not able to do that or change my mind at some point, then, I think it's just looking at what's kind of interesting. I think a lot of people doing this kind of thing, doing analysis in LHC experiments and whatnot, go on to kind of data science and computing and software and things like that. There's a lot of kind of skills that people pick up doing this sort of thing that are really quite widely applicable, even if they're no longer looking at top quarks and Higgs bosons and whatnot.
You've mentioned that obviously LHC is in Geneva. What's it like being a Brit abroad, and how did you adjust to living in another country? What's your French like?
Oh yeah, okay, that's the real question. It's not very good. There are certain French classes which I embarked on when I got here, but they've been somewhat disrupted along with everything else. So I think my French skills have dropped off a little bit in the last 6 months or so. But being out here in general, I think is a great experience. Even physics aside, it wasn't like something that I had in mind, but Geneva as well is just quite a unique kind of place. I mean, CERN as an environment is this menagerie of people from all different disciplines and walks of life, and that's fantastic. And really, that's the bread and butter of what goes on in CERN. Is just the kind of mixing and people kind of getting into R1, which is the main restaurant at CERN. It's kind of restaurant during the day, bar in the evening, and most people kind of, whenever they get kind of worn out with their day's work, everyone will kind of end up there, and that's where a lot of the conversations happen. And that kind of mixing and this sort of social aspect is really like quite important to the science, and it's where a lot of the ideas come up. So, I mean, CERN as an environment is great for that. And then Geneva is like another layer to that all over again, because there are all these international organizations, people coming from all over the world. I grew up in Dundee on the northeast coast of Scotland, and it's quite a far cry from Geneva. The kind of people that you meet and stories that you hear in Dundee are a little bit different to what you kind of come across in Geneva. But it's really quite an enriching experience. I think it makes you aware of other things as well. Things that you maybe never really would have thought of. So when I'm thinking about the future and maybe if I don't do physics, then now I know about these 5 other organizations that are doing really cool things. Or I met this guy at this party that said that his job was like this, and so it's I really really enjoy it. I'm hoping to stay here for sort of as long as I can. It's not an opportunity that comes along all that often, I think.
I imagine the CERN Christmas do is pretty wild.
Well, I mean, you say that, you'd be surprised. People have this idea, I think, of many of scientists and physicists as, I don't know, we kind of tame and whatever, but I think that's one of the things that was kind of surprising to me the first time I came to CERN was I think I had the same kind of image as maybe a lot of people do, where I envisioned this very glamorous kind of pristine high-tech lab kind of thing. And actually, most of it's, the offices and things are from the 60s, and all the money is underground in the machines and whatnot. And everyone's just more or less a normal person that just likes to, do their work and then end up in the pub at the end of the day. And yeah.
So does it require a certain sort of person to go and work in this kind of place? You've mentioned it's underground, but I don't think you've quite mentioned how far underground it is. Are you a claustrophobic person, or is it something you've had to deal with?
I mean, not really. I think if you're doing something like me, where you're analyzing the data, if you don't want to go and see the experiment, you don't have to. You can stay sitting at your computer and you'll be fine. But I think that's to miss something, because, like you say, I mean, it's like 100 meters underground in this massive cavern. It's really quite special. You come down into this massive, thing that's been dug out of this of the ground beneath France and Switzerland, and you're in this massive cavern, but you're still somehow kind of pressed against the wall, trying to work around this massive machine. And I think, it was one of my favorite things to do before everything kind of got disrupted, was to do tours and to take people down and show them. Just for that moment, there's the route that you kind of take them. There's a very specific moment where you kind of turn the corner, and there is the Atlas experiment in front of you. And I always make sure that I'm first around that corner so that I can look back and see people, kind of come around and usually kind of gawk at the side of it. And I still do it myself. And recently I've been able to go down a little bit more. I've sort of become the coordinator for the UK's kind of virtual visits program. So we've started doing, kind of almost like live streams from the cavern. And that's been really good to do that again. And I think it's a really good way for people to kind of engage even amongst all the disruption. And even for people who might not necessarily, even in normal times, get a chance to come actually to Geneva and go and see the thing for real,
So I'm guessing you don't need your passport to cross over from Switzerland to France when you're underground.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I've ever gone under the border in the tunnels. It's an interesting, Maybe
it's a pretty long walk, isn't it? If you're going to walk the whole way around.
Yeah, it's 27 kilometers around. So I always think about it in terms of the this is kind of a localized reference, but I always think about it in terms of the Glasgow subway, because the Glasgow subway is also a big circle, but it's like 10 kilometers around or something like that. So
a few trips if you need to, if you want to test it out. I like to do a little bit with my guests where I ask them for their 3 tips, Tim's 3 tips. Obviously you're an esteemed scientist, known for creating hypotheses and being able to make good conclusions. So it'd be great if you could give us 3 tips on how someone could create a more informed opinion, especially when they're online, in this era of kind of fake news. What can they do to avoid getting sucked in by fake news?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think that really you can just approach it, I think, almost as you would any problem in a kind of scientific manner. So I think, the scientific method is in a kind of vague way. People talk about, you make some observation and then form a hypothesis to explain that observation, and from your hypothesis get some prediction that you can then devise an experiment to test your prediction and kind of repeat that for a while until you arrive at something that satisfies you. And I think you could apply some of those kind of same broad principles to any kind of situation where you might need to be skeptical about something. So if I was to boil it down into kind of 3 points or 3 tips on that sort of thing, I think 1, it's important to know what you know. In the same way as if you're approaching a scientific problem, you need to first, look at what's in front of you and gather your evidence and decide what the things are that that you can build on. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is to know what you don't know. And I think that's something that is equally important. And certainly in science, is everywhere. And even in the measurements that, we do, we have to quantify exactly how much we don't know the things that we don't know and build that into the kind of statements that we're going to make. So yes, I think the second thing is know what you don't know. And the third thing is, as is always the case in science, is that you have to be prepared to be wrong. And I think that I think in a lot of kind of discourse, especially that happens kind of online and whatnot in this kind of post-truth era, that's maybe something that a lot of people could take to heart a bit more, is be prepared to be wrong. I think it's often very black and white and whatnot. But yeah, I think if I was to boil it down to 3 tips, I'd say know what you know what you don't know, and be prepared to be wrong about it. Yeah.
I mean, if I could chip one in there as well, know your source, know where it's come from. That's the good one, isn't it? If it's from Deirdre up the road who said it on Facebook, it's probably not as likely to be right as the BBC, is it?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of my, obviously there's misinformation about all sorts of things online being in some way associated with CERN. There's quite a lot that kind of, people have some quite interesting ideas about what really goes on at CERN, and it's sometimes it can be quite entertaining, the things that people send me.
I mean, what are some of these myths? I can imagine a lot of people get it wrong in terms of they're worried it might explode and cause some massive natural disaster, but it can't really, can it?
No. I mean, it did explode. That's what people forget, is that when it first got turned on, it did literally explode, and we're all still here. It was kind of annoying to the physicists, but I don't think that there were much sort of more global repercussions than that. So, I mean, that was the big one, was around turning it on, because I was still in school when that happened, and I remember, the tabloids and things about how it was going to swallow the earth and whatnot. But there are all sorts of conspiracies, and they're quite interesting. Even my mum sent me a message one day about something that my uncle had been telling her about what really goes on at CERN. And I found that quite entertaining, because I was kind of thinking, does he think that I'm in on it? Or does he think, I don't know.
The Earth's flat, I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
You mentioned you do these virtual tours. What kind of other ways do you get involved with getting people, especially young people, into STEM and getting them excited about science?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the virtual visits is a really good thing just now, because it's a lot of the more kind of conventional routes are kind of closed off. But in more kind of normal times, back in Glasgow, I mean, we have these master classes that we put on for high school students to come and kind of, they'll learn a bit about particle physics and CERN and whatnot in general, but then they'll get a chance to sit down and actually go through some real data and do some analysis of their own and see if they can find things. And then, sometimes we'll go into schools and talk to students there and go to science festivals. So we actually did, maybe we haven't been impacted as particle physicists by the kind of online world in as much as some people have. We're very used to doing kind of virtual meetings and things like that. And we did, about this time last year, to the Institute of Physics did a festival of physics in Edinburgh. And so we had a kind of live link from CERN, talk to a particle physicist. So I think, there's a kind of variety of ways that we kind of try and get involved like that. The virtual visits is a good one. I think that they're, super useful and I think great just now, because of all the disruption and whatnot. But even in normal times, it's not every school physics class that can take a trip to Geneva. So I think it's a good way to kind of, I think it's important to be able to reach into those kind of classrooms that might not always have the same opportunities.
So what sort of advice would you give someone who is, thinking about going to university to do a STEM career? What kind of advice would you give them to go and do that?
I mean, as far as a kind of a career is concerned, I think it's like it is to just get involved. If you're going to university to do a degree in a STEM subject, then to an extent, you'll be kind of exposed to whatever it might be that you're studying, and you'll have your lectures and I guess maybe some labs and things depending on what it is you're studying. But it is quite different from really being involved in that science, and that was what I found when I kind of finished my degree and started the PhD and actually doing the research, because I wasn't someone who was particularly involved kind of during my degree, and from speaking to other people kind of around me also doing PhDs or further on, and when they talk about some of the things that they were able to get involved with during their degree, I think, well, that first it sounds like really good fun and a really good way to kind of engage with your subject, but it meant that they were kind of just aware of the opportunities, and not just the opportunities, but it's about kind of what you're interested in. And in the same way as it's important, know what you know and know what you don't know, in as much as it's important to know what you're interested in, it's important to know what you're not interested in as well, So I think that, just talking to people, knock on someone's door and ask what they do. And if you're looking, to do things over the summer or whatnot, then, ask around. Because I think that's something that I didn't always kind of realize was happening around me. And maybe could have made more use of, and I'm sure it would have been useful to me. It's by no means, the only way to kind of go forward, but it's certainly a good way to kind of become more aware of these things.
You've mentioned you're in the middle of your PhD. How's that going for you?
That's the $1 million question. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going. No, I'm still enjoying it. It's definitely been a bit different the last kind of 9 months or so. Doing a PhD on one of these experiments like Atlas is the PhD students are often kind of the workhorse of the experiment. There are a huge number of them, and they're often doing a lot of the work. So you're as much as you're working on this experiment, it's also obviously your kind of training period, and so obviously you kind of suffer a little bit from the lack of these interactions with your supervisors and peers and things that you might ordinarily have. And it's you don't have the same kind of informal chats or opportunities to ask the stupid questions as you might do in normal times. But no, I'm still really enjoying it. I mean, I'm here because I was interested in it basically, and I'm still interested in it. So
Amazing. I've got one kind of more question for you. I like to describe this podcast as the virtual careers fair. It's a way for people to speak to and hear from loads of really different and interesting people. If you were at my careers fair on a stall, how would you pitch your job that you're doing now? Very quickly.
I'd say come and figure out the most fundamental aspects of the universe whilst going skiing on the weekends and engaging with all of these people and all of this French and Swiss wine. And I think that's the kind of key thing for me is like I said, it's a very kind of social endeavor as well. So you get to meet some of the most kind of interesting people that I think that I met anywhere before, also kind of pursuing this really compelling kind of pursuit. Yeah, pursuing the pursuit. But this endeavor to kind of understand these fundamental aspects of the universe and participate in and be a part of this kind of long legacy of outstanding science that exists at CERN, and not just at CERN, but the institutes that are kind of involved at CERN.
Adam, it's been an absolute delight to have you on today. Where can people find out more about your work, and where can they find you online if they want to?
Twitter is probably the best place. Adam Rennie on Twitter. Yeah. And if anyone fancies a virtual visit of Atlas, then by all means just search Atlas virtual visit and we'll be able to sort that out.
Fantastic. Adam Rennie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Good luck with your PhD. Stay safe, and I look forward to reading your work in the future.
Thanks very much for reaching out. I really enjoyed it.
Who would have thought that tiny, near-invisible particles could unlock the secrets of the universe, and that the internet as we know it was invented by a bored Brit working in a back office at CERN? A massive thank you to Adam for his time and for taking us through his interesting world of subatomic madness. As he mentioned, if you want to find out more about his work, feel free to check him out on his Twitter @Adam Rennie. Can you believe it's our 10th episode? Well, I have no plans for stopping quite yet, with lots of interesting guests lined up over the next few weeks. If you're enjoying the show so far, why not consider subscribing? That little button offers you the chance to expand your knowledge of lots of interesting professions, plus it makes our show look great and potentially opens us up to even more people, so if you fancy it, give it a click now. If you want to get in touch, why not drop us an email? It's jobhunterpodcast@gmail.com, or if you prefer, check out our socials. They're all @jobhunterpod on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Thanks again for listening. I hope you're having a great 2021, and we'll see you next time on the Job Hunter Podcast.